Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'd like to tell you about the power of stories, how stories can change people's lives. Now, when I was growing up, one of my earliest memories was that of listening to my grandpa. Every bedtime, he would tell us a story. And there were stories of maidens and monsters and heroes who would fight said monsters and rescue said maidens, going through some pretty gruesome and terrible adventures and trials on the way. And I always wondered, how did he get these stories? Where did they come from? Later on, I found out he was telling me about the Greek legends. But, the stories, they had power. They stuck with me. I feel like they made me what I am. Those stories that I was listening to when I was sort of 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, they became part of my life. Several years later, early on in my career, I had a chance to go to California. And they say timing is everything. Well, we timed it just right. It was the peak of the dot-com bubble, or boom, as some might call it. We couldn't turn our customers away. There was so much business to be had. And we felt like we were in the center of the universe. Everything was growing amazingly. And then suddenly, boom, it all ended. Within weeks, our major clients canceled their contracts, literally canceled them. It was a very difficult time. But when I look back on that time now, I feel like it's also what made me as a person. The challenges, the difficulties, and some of the adventures that I went through made me stronger. And I listen and I hear my grandfather's stories back in the day. He told me it was coming, and I'm stronger for the fact that he did. Now, around about the time that I was in California, there were a couple of Stanford postgrads working away in a garage somewhere, not too far from me. They invented something called a search engine. Some of you might have heard of it. It's a company called Google. And surprisingly, it was really popular. Who had a clue? Now, Larry and Sergey, they could have stopped right there. They could have decided, you know what? Job done. Let's enjoy the rest of our lives. But no. They set their sights high. They always aimed big. And I became part of the Google story about 4 years ago. Part of what made them successful, what they keep telling us time and time again is, it's so important to aim high, to try to do big things. Because even if you fail, you learn a lot more than if you do small things that succeed. And that's part of the Google story, the story that I'm living as well. So we've gone on to great things like self-driving cars, and there's a bunch of stuff coming that I'd love to tell you about. But believe me, aiming big has its advantages. So stories are important things. They have the ability to change our lives, inspire people, change the course of history sometimes. When we listen to the stories of Barack Obama, who had far less than most people in this room, and he made it all the way to the White House, and we listen to the stories of the Paralympics in London, how people who've lost their limbs are actually stronger and faster than many of us here today. And Ellen MacArthur, who made it all the way around the world single-handedly. It means something to us. It resonates within us. And what's amazing about the world that we live in today is that with technology, these stories can actually be transmitted to a global audience instantly. There are currently about 2 billion people who are connected to the internet. And in the next 5 years, that number will double. What I want to talk about in the rest of the presentation is, how can you take your idea, your product, or your service, and how can you tell that story that resonates with these people and changes perhaps lives, maybe even the course of history? So let's start with Scott Harrison. Scott was a photographer who was working in Africa several years ago. He was working for a charity, and one of the things that he saw was how important clean water was to the livelihoods of poor people in developing countries. People who didn't have access to water, to clean water, suffered from horrible ailments, sometimes chronic disabilities that affected them for years afterwards. And when Scott got back home, he decided he wanted to do something about it. So he did what most of us do when we have an idea. He talked to his friends. And his friends were, pretty good about giving him feedback, right? So they said, listen, Scott, nice idea, right? But you know what? There's so many charities out there. We hear from them every single day. And when we give money to charities, we don't know what happens to that. We don't know whether the projects are ever completed. We don't know if we're just paying the staff salaries. So Scott took all of this information in, and he launched Charity Water. And Charity Water tells the story of what Scott wants to do. It tells the story of how he wants to make sure that 100% of the money that he raises is going to go to support the development and the provisioning of clean water in these poor countries. It tells how it's going to track each and every individual project, and it will send you notifications as this project is underway through to completion. And it tells, probably most importantly, that they only focus on water. Now, if you've heard this story, if you've listened to Scott talk, or if you visit his website, it sticks in your mind. It stays there. And it differentiates Charity Water from any other charity out there. And that's a powerful thing. So here are some of the visuals of how Scott brings out the 100% guarantee and the fact that these projects contribute and what they use to track those projects in the field. Let's take a different example, business cards. Now, if any of you have ever received a business card from a company called Moo, you probably won't forget it. These cards are very individual, very unique. They come in many different shapes and sizes, different colors. And when they were first released several years ago, they spread like wildfire through the graphic community, through the design community. People just loved receiving them and holding on to them. You could say you almost wanted to frame them. And what Moo did was, it told the story of this special business card, this special creative that they help businesses develop. And they diversified. So as you can see from their website, they do a range of things, flyers, leaflets, with one goal, to make your business stand out. And not only that, they have a great ethos of customer service. So, you'll get the cards that you design within 24 hours, and you'll always be able to reach someone on the phone who can help you out with your problems. The people who use Moo don't think of it as a business card company. They think of it as an extension of their marketing team. They think of it as an extension of their business, and that resonates a lot more than a company that just makes printed products. The final example here is a digital agency. Are there any guesses? Does anybody know how many digital agencies there are in the UK? Anyone?
20,000.
Not bad. It's actually 20 to 30,000, so quite close. 20 to 30,000 agencies, and they range from one-man bands in their bedrooms all the way to staff with hundreds of people. Now, the difficulty that their clients have sometimes is telling one apart from the other, because the websites don't give that message too clearly. But that's never a problem when you see a company like Periscopics. They've made a virtue of the fact that they're nerds, geeks, propeller heads. If there's a problem and it involves data and getting into the detail, Periscopics is the company for you. And on their website, they make it very clear that they've done amazing projects with a bunch of well-known customers. Now, if you're in the market for a digital agency and you come across this proposition and you're thinking, look, I need someone to work through tons of data and look at my web analytics and so on and so forth, chances are the periscopic story sticks in your mind. It's the power of the story. Now let's look at how these stories can be consumed in different devices on different formats. Now, there's something called multiscreen behavior that's happening pretty much now in the digital space. It's about how people like you and I tend to consume media in more than one format. We might start our journey on a charity website with a mobile phone. Right? But when it comes time to donate, we might decide to use a desktop to complete the transaction because it's just easier to enter in our credit card details. Or it might be the other way around, because we're pressed for time. We come across this site when we're browsing our desktop, complete the transaction on mobile. And what businesses need to do to try and deal with this change is, number one, continue to tell that compelling story in a multiplicity of formats. And number two, allow our customers to switch back and forth between devices. So how does Charity Water do it? Well, if you look closely at their mobile site and their desktop site, it would be hard to tell the difference. The experience is so similar that it's seamless. And they've done a pretty good job at it. So you can switch back and forth with real ease. But if you look a little bit closer, you'll see some differences. On the mobile site, the menus have actually been pushed back into the background. So the site becomes uncluttered. It allows the story to come out a lot more. Buttons on the mobile site are actually bigger relative to the screen size. And that's to allow for those of us with fat fingers. But obviously it's not a problem that's faced by children when they have small fingers and they're good at clicking at everything. So, keeping that proposition, keeping that story, allowing it to shine forth, whilst allowing also that multi-screen behavior to happen. Now, Moo have a different challenge. They have a bunch of products and services. So how do you bring that out? How do you balance showing business cards and flyers and all manner of printed stuff? At first glance, it seems like they're very similar to the Charity Water website. The top half of the screen pretty much looks exactly the same. Sure, there's a little bit of truncation on the left and right, but the experience is seamless. But if you go below the fold, what you see is, in the desktop version of the screen, there is a lot of information that's being shared. Whereas in the mobile version, they're focusing on one or two key messages. And this is where businesses have to make trade-offs. You can't show everything that you want or are able to today on desktop formats in the mobile format. And what Moo have done is they've taken their hero proposition, the business card, and profiled it there. Because they know that most of their customers are on the mobile device going to engage with the business card proposition. Right? So it's a balance, it's a trade-off. But you do have to make that trade-off because you can't squeeze all of the information on the right in on the left. One other thing that they've done, which you might notice, is that they actually have a place for you to enter your email address. And what we find with mobile devices is people can only achieve so much. And quite often they want to complete tasks later on, as I said, the Charity Water example on the desktop. So what Moo allows you to do is leave your email address. If you research their proposition and you like it, stay in touch. And they'll send you offers and coupons that will help you to complete your transactions later on. But once again, the Moo story is there. They help businesses stand out. They're part of your marketing team. And they're able to make it happen in whichever device or format you choose. The final example is the propeller heads, the nerds. So these guys have it easier, right? It's once again, like Charity Water, one single proposition. And the only difference between the desktop and the mobile version of the sites is that they've actually streamlined it. So instead of 3 columns, you have one single column. And you can scroll up and down. You can look at the propeller head examples. You can look at the customer examples. But the experience is pretty seamless. they don't have to make the same trade-offs that Moo did. Right? So, if you're in the market for a digital agency, if you're looking for a company that can make you stand out, if you want to donate money to a charity that you feel is going to make a difference, these are some examples, these are some stories that will probably resonate with you long after the telling, much as my grandfather's stories resonate with me today. And the question that you want to ask yourself is, if you have an idea, a product, or a service, how do you tell your story? In what format? So that you can reach all those people who are connected to the internet all over the world. Thank you.